Right. It's just a short video to explain a few things, which will come back to a single point, which is to explain why no atheist should ever have to disprove the existence of a god or gods to anyone. I can already hear the theists getting up in arms right now. That's fair enough. There are a number of reasons why it's not fair. It's commonly levelled at the atheist that we claim there is no God, that we believe there is no God, and if we do believe such a thing, if we do claim such a thing, we submit to a burden of proof. Unless we can prove what we say, we're no better than the theist. Now, it's a convincing argument on the surface of it. I've got many friends who have fielded this argument at me before as an atheist. But there's two problems with it. One, it's nigh on impossible to disprove such a thing. We're talking about not only proving a negative or disproving something, we're talking about disproving an intangible, supernatural negative. It's just about as impossible to get, because God and our gods can take so many intangible different forms, because no single person is able to give a perfect definition of what a god or gods are, what they look like, because we have no clear ontology for them. It becomes, in fact, I'll say outright impossible to disprove such a thing. That's the first problem. The second problem is most atheists wouldn't tell you they don't believe there to be no God. They wouldn't claim there is no God. To claim there is no God is an epistemic statement, which means it's something a person can claim to know. Now, in lieu of any evidence, I submit that none of us can know, and that by definition we're all agnostic, though I dare say some people have a problem with that. So, in lieu of proper evidence, it's impossible to it's impossible to justify a claim that no God exists. Therefore, any atheist who is arguing from a position of rationality is not about to climb on that bandwagon, because they know it's not a position they can defend or justify. So that's the two problems. Atheists never say an atheist position is not a position of claiming there is no God. It's not a positive position. It's merely a rejection of an existing position. Imagine it this way: if theism had never existed, if nobody had ever conceived of the idea of an all-powerful, omniscient, supernatural, creative being in the universe, do you think there'd be any atheists? Think about it. I mean, technically we'd all be atheists if nobody had ever invented the concept of God. If nobody had ever posited it as a possibility, then theoretically we'd all be atheists, because none of us would believe it. But would we need that term? Well, clearly we wouldn't, because I could make up an intangible creature right now and give it a name, and until I created that name and gave it that name and pronounced my idea to the world, there'd be no name for people who disbelieve that. In fact, we have many negative positions. As Sam Harris often points out, we don't have non-astrologers. We have many negative positions that don't require terminology, but atheism, because of the widespread presumption of the existence of a God, is forced to take on a position, and it's often misrepresented in this way. So that's the first thing. Now, that's why it's impossible to disprove God, and that's why atheists don't say there is no God outright. Now, why shouldn't an atheist be asked to even disprove the idea of God, apart from the fact that they don't claim that no God exists? Well, the other reason is they're not making a positive claim. Imagine you're in a courtroom. You have a defence, and you have a prosecution. It's the job of the defence to assess an accusation. So the prosecution seek to prove their point, the defence seek to disprove it, and the defence doesn't need to disprove that a crime happened. You see, in law we have innocent till proven guilty, or at least do in most civilised countries. And what that means is that we can assume this to be false until it can be proven beyond doubt to be true. And that's the same thing we have going on with atheism. In science they call it the null hypothesis, the idea that if there's no evidence to support such a thing, then in all likelihood it can be assumed to be not true. Now, with respect to the argument for God, if we go back to the parallel of the courtroom, imagine the accusation is murder, the case of the court is murder. The defence comes forward and says, Your Honour, we don't believe it happened. We can't find a body, we can't find a murder weapon, we can't find a perpetrator or a victim, we can't find a motive, we can't find a means or location, we can't find anything. We've got absolutely no reason to suppose that such a thing exists. And in light of no evidence, I can only assume that this murder didn't take place. Now, would the prosecution be right in turning around and asking the defence, can you prove no murders of any kind ever happened? Of course they wouldn't, that'd be ludicrous. It's not the job of the atheist to disprove all forms of God, any more than it is the job of the defence team in a court to disprove all possible scenarios of crime. The job of the atheist is to scrutinise particular cases for the existence of God, to scrutinise the evidence for it, to scrutinise the arguments for it, and if there are insufficient arguments found, you are justified in rejecting it. And that is something we all do every day. We examine a situation, we see there to be a lack of evidence. We may not even term it as evidence, but we're not convinced that something is true, and therefore we choose not to believe it. If I were to tell you, right in my hand here, I had a solid gold ring that belonged to King Tutankhamun. It was an ancient ring, it was thousands and thousands of years old and belonged to an Egyptian family dynasty of pharaohs. And first question would be, show me it then. Now, if I opened my hand and there was a gold ring there, I'm sure you'd still be sceptical. I'm sure any person would justify it until the proper authorities could have vetted it, until we had some kind of corroboration in still doubting the validity of that claim. It could be any old gold ring, you might think. Now, imagine I go on further. Imagine I refuse to open my hand. Imagine I tell you there is a gold ring there, but I cannot open my hand. I am unwilling or unable to show you this gold ring. Would you be justified in still believing me? You may not be able to say for certain that I've not got the ring of Tutankhamun in my hand, but no one is going to call you for turning around saying, unless you're willing to prove it, I can't see any reason to believe you. I'm not going to say that it's not there. I'm just saying I don't see any reason why it would. And if someone was to say a penny, perhaps you'd be more willing to believe them. But in the case of a gold ring, I use that parallel because it's an extraordinary thing. And extraordinary things, as Carl Sagan said, require extraordinary evidence. Now I can hear people piping up here with another argument that perhaps this isn't fair, that there is evidence for God, and there's also the question of whether or not we should expect to find evidence for God, which is a classic one that apologetics use, but I'll do a second video concerning those two, and I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.